Okay. So, in the last class we started looking at this program called PAM, which is program for plan, applier mechanism, and it basically reasons about goals and plans and actions of people. And we had seen that it has a three components to PAM. One is the predictive mode, where it is trying to match something with what it is expecting. The second is the bottom up mode, in which it is trying to infer something that could be something that could match that it is predicting, and the third is the incorporation phase, in which it is creating the explicit story representation. So, let us look at that algorithm used by PAM in some detail. So, you read the input sentence, which is done in conceptual dependency theory, and you immediately go to the predictive component. So, is the conceptualization that you are reading, does it match some expectation, does it match some prediction essentially? If the answer is yes, then you go and incorporate the input and any inferences that you have made along the way into the story representation. Of course, if the input itself matches the prediction, then there are no inferences, but as we will see shortly, sometimes you may make inferences and produce something that matches essentially. So, once you have incorporated, you go back to the reading phase essentially. But if the predictive component does not succeed, that you are not able to match the input to something that was predicted, you go into the bottom up component and say, can you generate an explanation from the input which might match essentially. If you cannot generate, then the algorithm terminates unsuccessfully, but if you can generate the inference, treat the inferences as if they were the input and send them to the predictive phase. So, it goes through this cycle of going through the predictive and bottom up phases till it has done some inference which it was expecting to hear about essentially, in which case it goes to the incorporation phase and then goes to read the next sentence, and we will see a detailed example shortly. So, the explanation is generated as follows, that if you are talking about an event, then is it part of a known plan, then of course, we have explained that event essentially. Yeah, then the plan is the explanation. If it is not, then can you infer a plan of which it could be part of. So, let me just speed it up a bit. So, if it is not part of a known plan, can you infer a plan or plans from the event? If you cannot infer, then you return failure. If you can infer those plans, is one of those plans part of a known goal, in which case the plan is the explanation for the event and that goal is the explanation for the plan. If you do not recognize this plan as predicted, then can you infer a goal for which this plan could be a part of, and you do the same thing with this goal essentially. So, if you can infer the goal, yes, then you ask whether the goal was something that was predicted. So, can one of the goals that was inferred be instrumental to a known plan? So, goals can be explained by two ways. One is that they are part of a plan. So, he called up his sister, that was an action which was part of a plan of calling up his sister, which was part of the sub goal of asking sub goal, which is a sub goal of sub goal was that he wanted to call his sister, and he wanted to call his sister because that was part of his plan of borrowing money from his sister. So, goal can be explained either by plans that they are part of, or they can be explained by kind of themes. By themes, we mean a set of constant goals like desire to be healthy, for example. Then you could explain that that's what that goal is for. So, the basic idea is that if you are not expecting it, can you explain it essentially. So, let us look at one slightly more detailed example. It is similar to what we saw earlier. In this case, John wanted Bill's bicycle, and he walked over to Bill and asked him if he would give it to him, and Bill refused. So, keep in mind the D-control goal that we had discussed sometime in the last class. So, asking was one of those plans for getting it, then bargaining was another plan. So, then John told Bill that he will give him $5 for it, but Bill would not agree, and then John told Bill that he would break his arm if he did not let him have it, and Bill let John have the bicycle. So, having looked at the goal plan thing that we saw, we have some rough idea of what is how PAM is going to process this, but let us just look at the actual representations that it works with essentially. So, the first sentence, John wanted Bill's bicycle, is input to LE. Remember, LE is this English language interpreter, the program which converts English language into conceptual dependency, and this is the structure it creates, that there is a conceptualization that actor there is some actor who wants the bicycle which is possessed by Bill essentially. So, the actor is John and he wants to possess the bicycle which was possessed by Bill, and that is a goal of John essentially. So, John wanted Bill's bicycle. So, he walked over to Bill and asked him for it essentially. So, if you look at this chain of events that is happening here, John has this goal which is marked A here of wanting to possess Bill's bicycle, whose outcome is not known yet. Why does he have this goal? It could be because of two explanations. One is the theme that we can see there. The theme that he likes bicycles. So, we are trying. So, why does he want? So, we first heard that John wants Bill's bicycle. Then how do you explain this sentence, that either that he likes bicycles or he wants to ride the bicycle. So, we had seen that PAM has one of the rules that if somebody wants an object, they probably want it for something that it is used for essentially. So, we have explained why he wants the bicycle, but we do not know what has happened to the story, and then we hear this part that he walked over to Bill. Why did he walk over to Bill? Because he had a plan of walking or moving under his own power, so to speak. Walking is a way of this thing, which was part of a goal that he wanted to be near Bill, and that goal was part of a plan of asking Bill for the bicycle. So, he walked over to Bill and then he asked Bill for the bicycle. So, he is I mean, so maybe we will look at a detailed example shortly, but by the time John is PAM has finished understanding this story, we knew that he wanted to possess Bill's bicycle, whose outcome at that point was not fulfilled, but after PAM has finished listening to the story, the outcome of that goal is fulfilled, and then it knows that John first tried the plan of asking Bill, then he tried the plan of bargaining with Bill, then he tried the plan of threatening Bill, out of which the action was that John tells Bill that if he does not do something, he will hurt, break his arm or something. And then we heard about this action called Bill gives John the bike. Why did Bill give John the bike? Because he had a plan of complying with the threat. He had been threatened, and why did he have a plan of complying with the threat? Because he had this goal of maintaining his health, and the goal came from the theme which is preservation. You always want to remain healthy, and that is why this whole thing happened essentially. So, PAM creates an explicit representation of this story. So, here is a trace, and as you can see this was recorded in 1978, and this is the input story, and then it is processing the next input, which is the first sentence, which is John's wanted Bill's cycle at the bottom of the slide. You can see the story we have already heard. So, let us move on. So, the main conceptualization that comes into play here is this goal of D control, that there is a bicycle, there is a physical object which is a token which Pam creates for the bicycle, and which belongs to John, which Pam calls as Hume 0, and it is a goal that it should belong to, sorry, it belongs to Bill, and it should belong to John sometime in the future essentially. So, that was not something which is expected by Pam. So, it tries to figure out this explanation of why did he want Bill's bicycle. So, the goal that the goal of D control that this actor had about this object, which is the bicycle, has not yet met a prediction. So, it tries to look for an explanation, and it tries to test these two explanations one by one. One is it has got a use vehicle request, which is asking the question that does he want to use the bicycle, and the other is this, is he fond of that bicycle. So, we had seen in the story representation that Pam had created, that Pam has said that the goal could be one of these two reasons, that he wants a bicycle because either he likes bicycles or he wants to use it for something essentially. So, one of them will do. So, it accepts the fondness request, and it says that this confirms the prediction that people want things because they are fond of things, and there is a init request which basically stops this bottom up process and says okay, now you can stop that, you have matched the theme, and it says that well, it is found one request, that use vehicle request essentially. So, REQ is just a short form for request, which is a form of a rule that it uses essentially. So, knowing that John wants a bicycle, Pam creates a prediction that okay, John will have a plan for getting hold of the bicycle. So, as you can see here, it is loading a prediction here. It is saying that we expect to hear about a plan for the bicycle, because we know that John wants a bicycle essentially. So, if we hear something about this goal, if we hear about such a plan, then that this goal that we have, that John wants a bicycle, would be an explanation for that plan essentially. But the next input turns out to be that he went over to Bill. So, we were expecting to hear a plan, because plans are parts of goals. So, we know he has a goal. So, the next logical thing is that what is the plan for achieving the goal, but instead what we hear is that he went over to Bill. So, which is obviously not a plan, it is an action. So, in fact, this is an action which we can recognize P trans of this object Hume 2 to proximity of Hume 1 and so on, but it is not a predicted input. So, it has to go into the bottom up phase. Remember, it oscillates between the prediction phase and the bottom up phase essentially. So, which is like asking as to why is he walking towards Bill. We know he wants a bicycle, but why is he walking towards Bill essentially. So, this bottom up phase, Pam will try a series of explanations, find a series of explanations, because he has a plan to be near Bill, that is why he is walking towards Bill, because he has a goal of being near Bill, and which is what the plan is for, and so on and so forth essentially. And eventually it is part of some plan to get Bill's bicycle. So, all we know is that John wanted Bill's bicycle and he is walking towards Bill, and Pam will basically look for an explanation which will say this is one reason why John could be walking towards Bill essentially. And as you can see here, the explanation is a goal that he wanted to be near Bill, and that he has a plan which is the plan box. PB stands for plan box walk which the planner had, and the location was to be near the other person, which is Bill essentially. The next input is that he asked it to give it to him essentially, which is a M-trans activity. So, John told Bill that if Bill gave John the bicycle, it would make John very happy. So, that is the way you have represented this asking process essentially. So, Pam is still trying to explain how the sentence he walked over to Bill is connected to the goal of having the bicycle, and now he is asking, trying to figure out that how is that this plan of asking connected to the goal essentially. Because what you hear is an action, and what you are looking for is a plan essentially. So, the explanation for the action of asking is that it is part of a plan box called asking. So, just as we had a plan box for walking, we have a plan box for asking. So, the explanation of having said that if you give me the bicycle and so on is because he has a plan of asking that essentially. So, Pam is internally trying to understand what is really happening essentially. Now, Pam was expecting a plan because it knew that there was a goal for which it was looking for a plan. So, it now says that okay, I have understood why he is asked him for the bicycle, because he had a plan of asking him for the bicycle, which is a plan of getting hold of Bill's bicycle essentially. And then it goes into the incorporation mode. So, it adds to the story representation that it has inferred that John has this plan, had this plan of asking Bill for the bicycle, and it now loads two predictions that either Bill will agree or Bill will refuse essentially. So, both things could be possible, and Pam is ready to listen to both kind of stories essentially. So, either Bill says give it to him or Bill says no or something like that. So, it is expecting one of these two things, that either goal compliance or refusal of goal, and whenever it hears one of them or whenever it is able to infer one of them, then it will remove the other one from the expectations essentially. So, Bill's response in this case, as we know, was denial, which says that Bill refused, and which is basically an action essentially, that Bill M-transed something to John, and what he M-transed was that he will not give the bicycle to him essentially. So, this was not what Pam was expecting to hear. Pam was expecting to hear about whether this plan of asking will succeed or not, whether Bill will agree or not. Here of course, we have to make the connection explicit. It is, we can sort of understand that he said no means there is a connection between saying no and the plan that John had, but Pam needs to make this explicit essentially, that saying no is part of a plan of saying no, and that is something that Pam was expecting to hear essentially. So, as you can see here, Pam explains the action of M-trans by saying that there is a plan box of telling somebody. So, he had a plan of telling him something, and what he had a plan of telling him was something negative. So, this form 52 stands for negative, and he says that this he will not give the bicycle, he will not A-trans the bicycle to John essentially. So, his plan of saying that he will not give a bicycle to John was a plan for his goal of not giving the bicycle to John. So, that was Bill's decision to refuse. He wanted John to know. So, there is a goal, just as we had D control, we had this goal of D no here, that Bill had this goal of letting John know that he will not give him the bicycle, and for this goal of D no, he used the plan box for called telling, that you will tell the person, which was an explanation for this act of saying no essentially. So, there is an action of saying no or act of saying no, the plan of wanting to say no, and the goal of letting the person know that he is not going to agree essentially. So, Pam was expecting such a decision, it had this refusal goal request sitting in one of the predictions. So, it finds that accepts that, and then it goes into the incorporation mode essentially. It says that okay, I was expecting Bill either to refuse or to comply, and he has refused, but it takes a while for Pam to make this connection between the act of saying no and the goal of refusing. So, then it adds that to the story, that it has a it explicitly stores these facts that Bill had this goal of letting John know that he will not give it, for which he used the plan of PB tell to convey it to John essentially. From this, it has also made an inference that Bill wants to keep his bicycle. So, this he wants to keep control of his bicycle essentially, and his plan of refusing was his part of his goal of keeping his bicycle essentially. So, keeping one things is like a theme or a long term goal, just like health essentially. So, Pam does not try to explain that any further as to why did he refuse kind of thing. Later on, of course, when he sees it, when he tries to explain why did he comply, then that will be explained by a goal of maintaining his health essentially. So, then John tries bargaining. Again there is an action M-trans, that if you give me this, then I will give you $5 or something, and the processing is very similar to what happened in the case of asking, in the sense that there is a process of Bill saying no, and then Pam understanding that this act of saying no is part of the plan of saying no, which is the goal of saying no, and so on essentially. And then John resorts to threat. So, you might remember that we had discussed this word threat when we were talking about conceptual dependency. It basically says that A tells B that if you do not do something, then A will do something which will be bad for B kind of stuff, which is what this is written here. So, you can see that actor Hume 1, if A trans is this thing, then Hume 0 will do something, and some that kind of thing. So, some of this negation, for example, is hidden in these modes and forms, which is not very obvious to us here essentially. So, again this is like saying something and not what Pam was expecting, but now Pam recognizes that there is a plan called threaten, and basically puts that as part of the story, that it has understood that John is threatening Bill here essentially. So, adding to the story representation, that there is a plan box called threaten, which is part of the goal of D-control that we were originally trying to solve essentially. So, John has made a threat, and now we can either again look for compliance on Bill's part, or you might expect some evasive action on Bill's part, And basically it also says that once you know what is happening, you must update the status of the goal essentially. Did the goal succeed or did the goal fail essentially. So, the next inputs in the story is that Bill gave it to him, which is basically an A trans action that Bill did, and it confirms eventually the fact that John's goal has been fulfilled, but it cannot understand why Bill gave the bicycle. So, that was not a predicted event. So, it needs to explain that. So, it goes again into a bottom up mode. Even though the prediction that one of the predictions that it had was that John's goal will either succeed or it will fail, it can see that John's goal has succeeded, but it is not able to explain why did Bill give the bicycle to John, and for that it will find the explanation that he gave the bicycle to John because it was part of a plan to give the bicycle to John. Then he must have had a goal of giving the bicycle to John. Why did he have the goal of giving the bicycle to John? Because there was a goal conflict between keeping his bicycle and keeping his health essentially. And so far on this slide we are simply saying that there is he had a plan to give the bicycle. So, which is PB give, as you can see, which is part of the goal to give the bicycle, and essentially Pam was expecting that the threat will be complied to or refused essentially. So, Pam goes and adds that to the story that John's goal of getting Bill's bicycle succeeded, and Bill had this goal of staying healthy, and this would not have been possible. It was interfering with the goal of his keeping the bicycle. Earlier we had said that he has this goal of keeping his bicycle, that is why he refused to him, but his goal of being healthy is conflicting with the goal of keeping the bicycle. So, he has to let go of this bicycle. So, let us quickly see whether what has Pam understood. So, this is the question answering phase. Why did John walk over to Bill? Because he wanted to get his bicycle. Why did Bill give? So, this is actual interaction with Pam. Pam says, why did Bill give the bicycle? Pam says, because he did not want to get hurt. Then what are the consequences of John's walking over to Bill? This enabled him to ask him to give him Bill's bicycle. And what are the consequences of John's asking Bill to give him Bill's bicycle? Bill told him that Bill will not give him Bill's bicycle essentially. And you can see that the story never says, I mean, Pam does not try to say that he walked over to Bill because he wanted to be near Bill, because that was actually a sub goal, but it is tying it up with the original goal of he wanting the bicycle. Then it can produce, as we have seen, the actors versions. So, here is a story from John's point of view. I will just ask you to read it. And that is from Bill's point of view. Yep. So, maybe you can match the timing and with the earlier slide and see how long it took. I do not quite remember, but it finished at 4:34 p.m. Okay, so this is how PAM works. If you remember, it has got this knowledge about goals and plans and sub goals and sub plans and actions eventually, and it has got these three phases, that it has the predictive mode, where it tries to see whether what it is looking at is predicted, it has got a bottom up mode to see if it can produce something what it was predicting, and it has the incorporation mode in which it tries to build the story representation. So, in the next class we will look at this algorithm in a little bit more detail essentially.